Who put you in charge? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Uh, so Moses has heard something like this before, but now the Israelites, you know, are instead of being appreciative for the fact that Moses and Aaron are trying to help them here, they're just saying, may God judge you for what you're doing because you've made things harder for us. When we are trying to obey God, we're trying to follow God, and we're trying to help people out of their own situation when they don't know God. Do things improve immediately when we try to do it God's way? A lot of times it's not an immediate. Sometimes there's an immediate deliverance. Mm-hmm. And that's a point that Steve made last week is instead of just thinking this is an interesting story from several thousand years ago, or an interesting story because it shows what God has done, making for us to make applications to ourselves, it's realizing that when we are before God delivers us from sin, before we're saved, we're under the power of sin, and and Pharaoh is like Satan. It's sort of a type. And so the same thing will happen when you try to help people get out of where the situation that they're in. Many times they're going to resist it, for various reasons, uh, but they will turn against the people that are trying to help them, and certainly in this case. Um, so when we think about deliverance from sin as a concept, we we think, well, that's a good thing, and we understand that as God's children because we've seen that in our own lives. We know the difference. But when somebody is under the power of sin, uh, one of the things we underestimate is the power of sin and how it controls people's lives. They're thinking every aspect. We know in our own lives, even as Christians, that our struggle against sin is real. Every day it's a battle because we're fighting the battle and we're trying to follow God. We're trying to be faithful disciples. It's not easy for us, but for people who are under that, uh, they can't see it uh, because it controls everything about the way they think, they feel, everything. In that sense, it's kind of like when an addiction has somebody in its grip. That's the only thing that really matters for that person is that addiction because it is got such a strong grip on it. And getting free from that is not going to be an easy process at all. Okay, yes, I'll just have to thank you. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." So now the Israelites go to Moses and say, "This is your fault." And God, Moses goes back to God and says, "Why have you brought trouble on this people?" So, had Moses already forgotten what God had told him back at the burning bush? Did God ever say, "You're going to go, you're just going to tell Pharaoh, and it's going to be like that. It's going to be great"? It's going to be easy. No, God hadn't said that. He told Moses at the beginning, he's going to resist, and I'm going to have to show him uh, that I am God and he's not. So Moses had forgotten that. I'm sure that in the whole process of going all the way back to Egypt and appearing before Pharaoh, he was hoping that it wouldn't take a long time. But it was obviously not going to be an easy process. So why is it that we tend to blame God when life gets hard? You got to have somebody to blame, and it can't possibly be my fault. So it must be. I mean, if he's in charge, then it must be his fault. There's a proverb that says, a man's ways are foolish. They bring trouble to him, but in his heart he rages against the Lord. He blames God because we don't want to accept that responsibility for ourselves. Yeah, when Flip Wilson's, famous, thing, the devil made me do it, is the whole thing of, well, either it's not, okay, it's not God's fault, but the devil made me do this, and if it hadn't been for the devil, I would have been good. But we know that that's really not going to work, to put it that way. But Moses complains to God, and then can we go to the next slide? But notice God's response. God doesn't get mad at Moses for complaining. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand he will drive them out of his country." God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to him. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant." God is so gracious with us, and when we complain, he's not bothered by that. If we go back and we read a lot of the Psalms many times are very honest in terms of expressing feelings for God, that, and essentially saying, "Why have you done this? Why have you allowed this?" And that's in the Bible. God is so patient and gracious with us because he understands how we feel. But notice this. God says, "Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out." Who's the he? Pharaoh's still going to be in charge. Pharaoh wants to be in charge? Fine. Pharaoh is still going to be in charge of his country. He's the one that's going to drive them out. He's going to do it himself. And then, God refers to his covenant. What covenant is he talking about here? He says, "I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan." Where do we see that? With Abraham. With Abraham in Genesis 15, where we see this covenant ceremony. And God, says, "I'm going to give you this land." Did Pharaoh get the land? Did Abraham get the land when he was alive? No, he never did. He was always wandering around. And God told him, he said, "Your people are going to go away from here, and they're going to be gone for a long time. And then I will bring them back, and they're the ones who are going to get the land, but it's going to take a long time." So when God established the covenant hundreds of years before, he had told Abraham what was going to happen. And he renewed the covenant with Isaac and with Jacob. So, and God says, I have remembered my covenant. That's the last one. Does God forget me? God doesn't have a memory problem. He doesn't say, oh, yeah, I think there was something. I think I remembered that I said something to Abraham about that. He never forgets, and he always keeps his word. So that's the thing that we can be truly grateful about. So can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. The thing that to remember is when God gives his word, he never goes back on it. He will always keep his promise. And notice what he says he's going to do to for the Israelites. I will bring them out. I will free you. I will redeem you. The Israelites were God's people, even when they were still slaves in Egypt, even when they didn't really know who he was. We see there word of the patriarchs that in that relationship with God may have been, preserved and to some extent, but the Israelites having been in Egypt for this long, that was pretty far removed from the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Mm-hmm. When we were still enemies, he loved us and he made a way for us to know him. And he knew at that time that we would be his. And his people, the people of his own possession, are still out all over the world. And some of them, many of them, still haven't come to him. But he has a means of doing that. And his disciples we are the ones that can help to bring people to God and let them know that there is a way out of sin, that God has a plan. So this land is a gift as a possession. What else is a gift that God has given that's more important than land? Forgiveness, salvation, knowing him. That's the most precious possession. We can go to the next slide. Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Then the Lord said to Moses, Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of his country. But Moses said to the Lord, If the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? So Moses is going back to this thing of, you picked the wrong person. I'm not good enough to do this. Why is it that sometimes difficulties can make it hard for people to hear what God is saying? Mm-hmm. Right. And when things are hard, it can make us feel like, well, I thought everything was supposed to be okay now that I'm a Christian. Uh, what is the other thing that can make it hard for people to hear from God instead of difficulty? When things are really good. When things are really, really good, you feel like, well, I'm okay. Uh, sometimes the difficulties can draw us to God, but sometimes it can make it really hard for people to hear from God. And I think it's really important that when we are delivering the message, that we're really clear about that and we're really consistent. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to get a little genealogy here of Moses and Aaron. And we go back to Levi. And one of the things to notice about this is sort of establishing the authority and the validity of Moses and Aaron. Why is it important that for us to know that Aaron and Moses came from the tribe of Levi? That was the priestly tribe. That was, when God makes his new covenant, when they're out in the wilderness and delivers the law to them, that's the tribe that is going to have all the priests. And if you've ever known a Jewish person whose last name was Cohen, Cohen means priest in Hebrew. And if you talk to Jewish people, if you were to ask them, do you know what tribe your forebears came from of the 12 tribes, they would probably say, no idea, unless their name is Cohen, because if their name is Cohen, there's a good chance that they're from the tribe of Levi. Now, in this genealogy, this is skipping a few generations. So it's, 430 years is a long time, clearly, but it's establishing the fact that, this is the lineage of Moses and Aaron, and this is sort of establishing them in those senses. Can we go to the next slide, please? God's going to repeat his commission to Moses. I've made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. But notice this. He says, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. I will bring the Israelites out by the visions, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So now we come to this thing that Steve had mentioned before of Pharaoh's heart being hardened. It's a little bit difficult maybe for us to understand why it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So why is it that hearts can become hard? How do hearts become hard? Yeah. Have you ever had the experience of telling your children to do something and they resist, or your I know this never happens in your household, but your husband or wife says, I want you to do this, and you're like, we can harden our hearts in little ways, but the sin can harden hearts, over a long term. And Moses and Aaron weren't exactly spring chickens when they were going and appearing before Pharaoh. So sometimes we might think, well, I'm too old, or I'm not in a position of really being able to be effective for God. But apparently God thought that he needed people who had experience and who would be, who would have had maybe a sense of status to be able to go before Pharaoh. So we're never too old and never too young to serve God. Yes. Yeah. If you have an entire economic system that's built on slave labor, then you're not going to let go of that too easily. That's why in our own country, in our own history, that was part of the thing that made it so difficult, because we had an economic system that was built on slavery, and then just to say, okay, yeah, we're going to give that up, that wasn't going to happen easily. Steve. Hmm. As we will see in throughout the rest of this story, there are times where it's going to say God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and there's going to be times where it said Pharaoh hardened his heart. In fact, if we can skip to the next slide, this is the first sign that's performed for Pharaoh by Moses and Aaron, and Aaron takes the staff and throws it down, and it becomes a snake. So there's a demonstration of the and this is the thing that God had Moses do when he appeared at the burning bush. Can we go to the next slide, please? But notice this last statement. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So when Pharaoh saw this sign, uh, but then his magicians were able to do something similar, he said, well, it's just some kind of trick. And he hardened his heart. He wasn't going to be swayed by this particular sign. We can harden our hearts, but then in this particular case, and this is for God's particular purpose, what he was going to do, there's this give and take of God confirming in Pharaoh what Pharaoh was already going to do. And that's the danger in this, is that we can resist God. We can allow ourselves to become hardened, so that we're not any longer hearing and responsive to God. We think about the parable of the soils that Jesus told in Matthew, of the seed being scattered, and the first soil that it hits is the pathway. And what happens to that seed when it hits the pathway? It can't, it can't penetrate the soil. And what happens to the? Jesus said, "What happens to the seed? The birds come and they take it away." And the person doesn't, doesn't get any benefit from it. The other soils, there's some sort of receptivity, but in the case of the path of a totally hardened heart, there's no receptivity at all. They don't listen at all to God. And the thing for us is probably, we think about the people that we interact with who don't know God and who have hardened hearts, and if we think about, through prayer, through what we say, if we can perhaps help them to listen, so that their hearts might be softened a little bit, and praying in those cases. But also for ourselves, to not allow ourselves to become hardened, either because we resist God, or sometimes maybe because something even as a good a thing as coming to church and doing a lot of things like that, if they become habitual, then if we're not careful, that can allow a hardening to take place. All right, I think, having heard the bell, it's time for us to conclude our class. So we'll end with a prayer, and then we'll prepare for our worship service. Father, thank you for your word and for how it speaks to us today. And help us, Lord, in our own hearts, not to harden them against you. And help us as we go out into the world and we try to bring your word to others. Help us to say the things and live in such a way that their hearts, instead of becoming hardened, might be more receptive to your message of salvation. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.